Hi there, everyone. My name is Christian Eschbach, and welcome to another one of my album reviews. And normally I do Canadian reviews every 10th album. It's kind of my signature thing. Once in a while I make a change, and this is going to be one of those times where I make a change because this time usually a multiple of 10 would be review 250. And for review 250, I want to do something special. I don't have a Canadian artist lined up to do something special with. So we are going to cover this one here, Spirit of the West, go figure, at review 248, as 249 is going to go directly into 250. So let's get into this. I'm going to read a little bit off of the wiki here. Give me a moment. Alright, so this is a Canadian band, which when I originally announced in one of my things that this was an upcoming review, I forgot to mention that it was a Canadian band, because at the time I totally forgot it was a Canadian band. Spirit of the West is actually a band from northern Vancouver. They originally started as Canadian folk music in the 80s, and they slowly transitioned, adding hard rock, Britpop, Celtic folk. This album definitely has early alternative rumblings in here. And the band, according to this, broke up in 2016. They started in 1983. That's a pretty good run, especially for a Canadian band. A lot of Canadian bands have a very similar to sound to this one. I actually was surprised when I saw they were from northern Vancouver, because with the style and sound that they have, I honestly believed that they were from the Maritimes. The folksy element sounds very much Nova Scotian, New Brunswick, PEI, that kind of sound that you hear a lot coming out of there. Canadian folk definitely has its own distinct sound. When people say there's no such thing as Canadian music, they're full of shit. All right, Spirit of the West. I've got a couple other ones on the CD mix downstairs. I can't remember the names of the bands now. There's quite a few bands though. Great Big Sea is another one. Definitely very distinct sounds that you can hear, and throughout all of them, very Canadian. You know, you can always tell a Canadian band when, not all Canadian bands, let's be clear, okay? Nickelback does not sound like this, Rush does not sound like this, Avril Lavigne does not sound like this, you know, Billy Talent doesn't sound like this. This is definitely very Canadian prior to 2000. Okay, that's the best way to put that. So, I'm going to get into the track listing here. Alright, the album opens up with D for Democracy. This one definitely is huge on the folk roots. You can hear all the more folk style instruments in there. It's not your standard guitar, bass, drum lineup. You know, you can hear some flute in there. You can hear some other additional strings in there. I want to say violin or fiddle if you prefer. Maybe some mandolin in there. I'd have to really check throughout this whole thing. But, you know, like you can definitely the only American band that I can think of off the top of my head that would be even remotely close to comparable would be REM, and that's still me really stretching it to get there. D for Democracy opens up the album nicely. It's got a great vibe, lets you know how this album is going to sound and what you are in for. And if you do not dig on D for Democracy right off the bat, you're not going to honestly like most of the rest of the album. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I grew up listening to more folksy stuff to a degree because I've mentioned in previous reviews, Krista Berg was one of the few artists that both my parents could agree on. And if you listen to Krista Berg, there's definitely a very folksy sound in there, but there's a very European folksy. This is Canadian folksy, so they're two different folksies. But growing up on the one makes it easier to appreciate the other, as far as I'm concerned. After D for Democracy, we get into Big Head. And I like Big Head when it gets into the choruses. This one is also still very much with the folk roots, but you can feel a little more alternative kind of drive into it. I think I was thinking a little bit maybe Alice in Chains, possibly a smidge. Um, Next track up, Spot the Difference. This one, once again, you're still very much in that folksy root of the band. Now, take into consideration, this album's from '91. Only $2 used. This was a Tracy pickup. I should have mentioned that earlier. And for $2, I'll come back around to that. But um, by the time I get to Spot the Difference, I'm kind of a little bored because it's kind of been relatively the same the whole way through. It starts off really strong, gets you going. And then by the time you get to, Spot the Difference, it's kind of like, all right, are we going to get any extra flavor to this album? Are we going to get anything different? Is it all going to sound like this? Which is basically folk with a little bit of electric thrown in. Then we hit Pulling Lame. And Pulling Lame, honestly, alternative song. It doesn't specify if it's Northern Vancouver Island, Northern Vancouver City. It just says Northern Vancouver. Either way, Vancouver, you're like right here, and Seattle, you're like right here, kind of thing. So easy to pick one up from the other. And as it was '91, they would have been picking up on the early days. This would have been, definitely early Nirvana, still early Alice in Chains, a couple of the other ones in there. Alice in Chains, maybe Pearl Jam might be the two I would go with the most for describing the sound of the alternative on here, but it's not an accurate description. It's just that general vibe. I really dig Pulling Lame. Now, I'm not a huge alternative fan. If you're one of my regular viewers, you know that. I don't mind alternative. I don't mind grunge. Pulling Lame is really good, though. I really enjoy this one, and it's actually the first song on the album when I've got it playing, especially on my MP3 player. When I've got it going on the headphones and whatnot, I really get into this one and really start paying attention, really start digging it. And for me, this is kind of where the album really kind of kicks off. After that, though, it just kind of falls down again. After that, we get into Let's Make a Mystery. This one, very much tragically hip to me. And I know, as I mentioned in Canadian bands, I left out the hip there. But the hip was never, to me, a folksy band. They were more acoustic-y. And Let's Make a Mystery definitely gives off vibes of the tragically hip. And I'm not a huge hip fan either. That's the one time I will. There's a couple times I say I'm a bad Canadian. I'm not much of a tragically hip fan, so I say that makes me a bad Canadian. I really don't give a shit about the NHL. Professional hockey makes me a bad Canadian. And I could not ice skate until I was in my 30s. I'm a bad Canadian. Everything else, I'm a good Canadian. I'm a bad Canadian for that. Sorry. See what I did there? Okay. All right. So as I was saying, Let's Make a Mystery. Tragically hip vibe. Great head bobbing. Really dig this one. After that, we go to Goodbye Grace. This is a mellower track, folksy-ish, but it definitely has a hint of some Tom Petty in there. There's a certain bit of it where it goes a little less folksy and a little more Tom Petty. I want to say like that kind of mid to late 80s Tom Petty kind of. A little bit, not a lot, but getting in there. Not Last Dance with Mary Jane, definitely prior to that, but, that era. After that, we get into actually my favorite song on the album, Just Another Day. This song totally reeks of Pink Floyd to me. The whole way through, every last part of it, like the second it came on, I went, whoa, this sounds totally Floyd. The whole way through, all of it reminds me of Floyd. And the best parts of Floyd, too. Like, it's really good track. And if this was an homage to Floyd, that would be great. I guarantee it's not, but I really love, I really love when it gets in the chorus. And I'm really surprised that the song's called Just Another Day, because I would have thought Death's the Best Seller, which is, when it kind of gets in the Death's the Best Seller, Death's the Best Seller today, I think that's a great line. 91, 2021, 30 years later, Death's the bestseller today still works. Great line. Great line. And fantastic song. Really totally get in this song. Honestly, like I said, my favorite song on this album. Then we get Just Another, oh no, sorry, after Just Another Day, sorry, it's Polaroid. And for Polaroid, this one's a mellower one. I wrote notes for all the songs, I couldn't remember them all. Because, once again, there's a definite similarity throughout the whole entire album. And as someone who only recently picked up this album, it's been around in my MP3 player. I've had it going off and on for a couple months now. And I still have a hard time telling all the songs apart by their titles. So, notes. This one's mellow, acoustic, but it has definitely electric flex in it to add flavor. Very mellow kind of tune. And I don't want to call it folksy. It's definitely more of an acoustic number than a folksy number. But like I said, those electric flex that are in there, because there is definitely some electric. And the electric flex that are in there really add some nice nuances and makes it a tasty song. Political, very folk. We're totally back to their folksy roots on that one. Is it bad? No. Do I enjoy it? It's okay. Ship Name Frank. This one's interesting musically. I can feel a little bit of a Caribbean kind of vibe in there, a little bit in the percussion section. Just a smidge. Flavorings, which, Ship Name Frank kind of makes sense a little bit. It also has kind of a loungy feel to it, too. Something about the music in it reminds me of when you turn on the drum programming in a good old church organ. And I don't mean the big wall pipe organ. I mean, the little ones, the 2-level organ kind of thing that you see. Even popular in that, but they have these little settings where you can flip on to get tempos and rhythms and stuff like that, and then the old ones. And there's definitely a vibe in there that sounds like that. It gives it kind of a loungish kind of vibe. And then there's the typical folk vibe over top of all of that. So you get kind of like this Caribbean lounge folk kind of vibe going on with this song, which is cool. It's really enjoyable musically. That's kind of where I go. And then the very last song on the album, Far Too Canadian. A slower tune, acoustic, but not folky. I would not refer to this one as folky at all. But because it's got some cool flout work in it, or flute work, or, the flautist really lets go, I want to say Jethro Tull. It's got a cool Jethro Tull kind of vibe to it. And I like the idea that, it's a song about being far too Canadian. And it makes sense. I guarantee it's a jab at being able to try and break into the U.S. market. Because once again, Vancouver, Seattle, right? And I have mentioned this before with Canadian bands. This is not talked about often enough. And the biggest problem with Canada sitting right next to the US is it is 100 times more difficult for Canadian musicians to get visas to go play shows in the US than it is for American bands to get visas to come and play in Canada. I think they've reduced the rules a little bit, but not a lot. Like myself, for example, when I was out playing in my band still, I had another guy I was working with on the side who could get gigs playing in the U.S. He played ukulele. Check him out. His name is the Cardboard Tim. His name is Tim. He's the Cardboard Bard is his handle. You can find him on YouTube. He's got some great videos out there where he does acoustic ukulele renditions of songs. I played percussion behind him. And in order for me to go play, he was American, so he could go play in the States no problem. In order for me to go play in the States with him, which unfortunately never got the chance to do, but in order for me to do it, we would actually have to, I don't want to say lie, but fudge my credentials and say that I was actually there as the roadie, because it's easier for me to get in as a roadie than it is to get in as a paid musician. Total BS. And it's one of the major reasons why I do have major issues with the U.S. in the way that the U.S. treats Canada. There's a whole bunch of different things on that one, but that's a political confessions of a domestic engineer episode. But the song "Far Too Canadian" kind of really gets into the idea behind that. And in general, Americans, especially back then, like I said, they're definitely Canadian sounding. There's no doubt about that. And because of that, they definitely would have had a hard time breaking into the U.S., especially back then. And that is definitely something they would have been told: is you are far too Canadian. On the whole, Tracy paid $2 for this album. Do I think $2 was a great price for this album? Yeah, $2 was a perfect price for this album. It's great. I totally forgot about this band. I do remember that they actually did get some good traction when I was in high school, and not good enough traction though. But they came out in a time period where, for me, they just weren't a band that I was into, or the music style. It was not something I was into. Would I pay full price for this album if I found it brand new? Depends on what that full price is. Do I think it's worth like $13.99? Sure. Do I think it's worth $15.99? Okay. I wouldn't pay $15.99. I personally wouldn't buy the album new. Used was good for me. And that's only because it's not an album I'm going to listen to regularly. Out of all the bands that I've mentioned while talking about them, at least folksy wise, like Krista Berg, I still love listening to. At least certain albums I throw in regularly. Jethro Tull, certain albums I will always throw in regularly. Is it an album I'm going to throw in regularly? No. It's not Rush. It's not Billy Talent. But it is still a good album. So if you're looking for an album that truly has a Canadian sound, this is a band that truly has a Canadian sound. Absolutely. I recommend checking it out. Give it a listen. It is totally worth it. I don't think it'll be a waste of your time. But would I recommend you buy the album? You could buy the album. There's nothing wrong with it. If you find it for $2 at used, go for it. You will not go wrong. $2 used. But you gotta like folk. All right, everyone. Those are my thoughts. Those are my opinions. That's what the comment section is for, so you can give me your thoughts and opinions on what I have said here and about this album. What do you think? If there is another album you recommend I go check out, put it in that section. There is that like button, that subscribe button, the little bell for the notifications. Please click on those. There's a link that goes to Patreon. Otherwise, peace, love, take care.